We're going to start off with race. And race is a specious classification of human beings created by Europeans during a period of, we're talking about American racism. We're not talking about racism in other societies. We're talking strictly about homegrown racism. Created by Europeans during a period of colonial expansion, using themselves as models of humanity and civilization. The utilitarian purpose of the creation of the concept of race is in the maintenance of white power, privilege, and a sense of entitlement. And these are our definitions that we're working with today. You wanna? And we said earlier that in our definition, racism is prejudice plus power.
I always knew that something was wrong, but nobody ever addressed it in a way that I felt would give me any kind of direction or understanding in my life until I became a Unitarian Universalist. And our congregation was one of the first to be trained by the People's Institute for Survival and Beyond out of New Orleans, which is similar to Crossroads training, which is what Laurentia was talking about. It's more or less the same kind of training that deals with all the forms of racism. Up until that time, I kind of didn't know where I belonged, and I spent a lot of time with people of color and Latinos, very uncomfortable in my own skin, feeling a lot of guilt and angst, until I found anti-racism training, which opened my eyes and gave me so much back. It's a slippery slope. It's hard work for white people, and I'm talking to the white people here. I don't see too many of you, but that's kind of what happens with anti-racism training. As progressive people, we do a lot of good work, but unfortunately, the piece that a lot of white people get stuck on is racism, because there's a denial. And there is a sense of, well, which I'll talk about in a few minutes. I won't go into that now, but one of the things I learned is that we as white people shouldn't expect that black people should, or black or other people of color should teach us about racism. We are the perpetuators of racism. We should understand what racism is because we live it, but unfortunately it's an invisible system. So we need to reclaim our humanity. We need to take some other steps. And in fact, during the civil rights movement in SNCC, in Waveland,
yeah.
In Waveland, there were a lot of whites who came to join in the civil rights movement and the voter registration drive, and they were told by some of the black brothers and sisters, well, you need to go back to your own communities and work with your own people to end racism. And that kind of shocked a lot of people, and you know, like, oh, okay, what are we supposed to do? You can be part of a white organization or a white church or a white group, and you can still be an anti-racist. You don't need black people to tell you how to be an anti-racist. You need to do your homework. And it's a process, because racism robs us of our humanity. All of us, not just some of us, but all of us. And there are costs to racism. The costs to racism for white people are largely psychological, spiritual, intellectual. And I'm not talking about poor whites who are, poor whites experience a different kind of privilege, different kind of white privilege, because their privilege is not being blamed for their own poverty. Whereas, you know, by and large, poor African Americans and Latinos, they're poor because it's their own fault, because you're not working hard enough. But whites are generally not blamed for their own poverty on the collective, and we need to remember to look at white people as a collective. It's real easy for this nation to look at black people as this whole monolithic group, but we don't tend to look at whites as a collective. We white people like to say, well, that's what those white people are like, but I'm not like that. We need to kind of get away from that and claim the responsibility for the benefits of our privilege. We have privilege because other people don't, and it's as simple as that. So, I just wanted to ask 2 questions before I go into the definition of white privilege, which we don't have on the overhead. So I'll just read it to you. If you could live your life again, would you do so as a black person? This is the question for the white brothers and sisters out here. You don't have to answer it, just think about it. And what do you like about being white? Just some questions to ponder. So, what we strive to do is to be an ally to people of color. We need to learn how to accept leadership of people of color, not always think that we're the ones that are right and we have the answers. We saw a lot of problems in the 60s when Johnson put in the, what do you call it, the Great Society, and all this money started coming in to try to deal with poverty. Most of the people who ran those anti-poverty agencies were white people who did not necessarily understand the communities in which they were supposed to serve. Kind of can do more harm than good. But as Nancy mentioned before, we're on a different continuum. You know, we're all somewhere different on the continuum of trying to develop an anti-racist personality. The first step for whites is to, first of all, acknowledge white privilege, and then to really delve deeply into it and understand how it works at the personal level, the cultural level, the institutional level, and the systemic level. And then we can certainly strive to be allies to people of color, to accept leadership from people of color. This definition comes from a woman named Peggy McIntosh. Maybe some of you have heard of her. Peggy McIntosh works out of Wellesley College for research on women, and she developed a whole paradigm for the ways in which women suffer under male oppression. And then she decided that she could use that same model to apply to white privilege. So she went from male privilege to white privilege, and it worked. She's very, very widely quoted. And her definition is, white privilege can be defined as invisible systems of unearned benefits and advantages that confer dominance on those of European ancestry, people who look like me. And the quote from her is, I see a pattern running through the matrix of white privilege, a pattern of assumptions that were passed on to me as a white person. My skin color was an asset for any move I was educated to want to make. I could think of myself as belonging in major ways and of making social systems work for me. Whiteness protected me from the many kinds of hostility, distress, and violence which I was being subtly trained to visit in turn upon people of color. Peggy McIntosh gave us a list of what she was trying to identify the ways that on an everyday level privilege would affect her. And these